The great spaceport of Draconis Prime buzzed with activity as ships from across the galaxy landed and departed. But in the royal nursery, deep within the crystalline palace, silence hung heavy like a dark cloud. Queen Zephyra stood before a clutch of dragon eggs, her golden scales shimmering with worry. "The others have already hatched, Your Majesty," whispered Elder Korath, his ancient voice trembling. This one is different." The egg in question was smaller than the rest, its shell a disturbing white color instead of the traditional deep emerald. Cracks had begun to appear along its surface 3 days ago, but still nothing emerged. The other dragon hatchlings, already the size of small horses, played nearby. Their scales gleamed in brilliant shades of blue, red, and gold. They breathed small puffs of flame and roared with tiny but fierce voices. A soft tapping sound came from the white egg. The queen's massive head turned toward it, her eyes narrowing. More cracks appeared, spreading like spiderwebs across the pale shell. Finally, with a wet sound, the egg split open completely. What emerged made everyone in the room step back in horror. The hatchling was pure white, its scales lacking any color at all. Its eyes were a pale pink, almost transparent. Where the other young dragons had strong, powerful limbs, this one seemed weak and small. Its wings were translucent, showing the delicate bones underneath. When it tried to breathe fire like its siblings, only a small puff of cold air came out. "An albino," gasped Elder Korath. "In all my centuries, I have never seen such a thing among our kind." The other hatchlings immediately sensed something was wrong. They backed away from their pale sibling, hissing and snapping. One of them, a particularly large red hatchling named Pyrex, lunged forward and bit the albino's tail. The white dragon cried out, a sound more like a wounded bird than a mighty dragon. "Enough!" roared Queen Zephyra, but even her voice carried disappointment. She looked at her albino child with a mixture of shame and confusion. "What are we to do with this?" "This mistake?" Elder Korath stroked his long beard, his expression grim. "The ancient laws are clear, Your Majesty. A dragon who cannot breathe fire is no dragon at all. It is an abomination that brings shame to the entire bloodline." The albino hatchling stumbled toward its mother, seeking comfort and warmth. But the queen turned away, unable to look at her strange child. The other hatchlings continued to torment their pale sibling, pushing it away from the food and the warm sleeping areas. Days passed, and the situation only grew worse. The royal court whispered about the cursed child. Visitors to the palace would point and stare when they saw the albino dragon. Some suggested it should be sent away or even destroyed to preserve the family's honor. The albino dragon, who had been given the name Frost due to his cold breath, grew more isolated each day. He would huddle in the darkest corners of the nursery, trying to make himself invisible. His siblings showed him no mercy, constantly reminding him that he was different, weak, and unwanted. News of the albino dragon spread throughout the galaxy. The dragon race had ruled over hundreds of worlds for thousands of years, feared and respected by all other species. They were known for their incredible strength, their ability to breathe devastating fire, and their brilliant, colorful scales that could deflect most weapons. The existence of a white, fireless dragon was seen as a sign of weakness in the entire species. Other alien races began to whisper among themselves. If the mighty dragons could produce such a defective offspring, perhaps they were not as powerful as everyone believed. Some species that had been under dragon rule for centuries began to question whether they needed to continue paying tribute and following dragon laws. Queen Zephyra felt the weight of these concerns. She called a meeting of the Dragon Council, the governing body that made decisions for all dragon-controlled worlds. The massive chamber filled with dozens of adult dragons, their scales creating a rainbow of colors as they settled onto their stone perches. "We have a problem," announced the queen, her voice echoing off the crystal walls. "The existence of the albino hatchling threatens our reputation across the galaxy. Already I have received reports of unrest on several worlds. The Zephyrian rebels have increased their attacks, claiming our bloodline is tainted." Council member Ignis, an enormous red dragon with scars from many battles, spoke up. "Then the solution is simple, Your Majesty. Remove the source of the problem. Send the defective hatchling away where no one will see it. Or better yet," added Tempest, a blue dragon known for his cruelty, "end its misery permanently. A quick death would be a mercy compared to a life of shame." The queen considered these words carefully. She knew that her people valued strength above all else. Showing weakness could lead to rebellion and chaos throughout their empire, yet something deep inside her resisted the idea of harming her own child, no matter how different he might be. "I will consider all options," she said finally. "But for now, the hatchling will remain under heavy guard. No outsiders are to see him." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, a small human exploration ship called the Starfinder was approaching the Draconis system. Aboard the vessel, Captain Maria Santos reviewed her mission orders. Humanity had recently made contact with the Galactic Council, and this was one of their first diplomatic missions to a major alien world. "Captain," called out her young daughter Emma, who had been allowed to accompany her mother on this historic mission. At only 12 years old, Emma had already shown an unusual talent for communicating with alien species. She seemed to understand them in ways that even the best xenobiologists could not explain. "What is it, sweetheart?" Maria asked, looking up from her datapad. "I keep having strange dreams about this place," Emma said, her green eyes distant and thoughtful. "There's something sad there, something that needs help." Maria smiled and ruffled her daughter's brown hair. "It's probably just nerves about meeting the dragons. They're supposed to be pretty impressive." As the Starfinder entered orbit around Draconis Prime, neither Emma nor her mother could have imagined that their arrival would change the course of galactic history. The albino dragon hatchling, still huddled alone in his corner of the royal nursery, had no idea that hope was about to arrive in the form of a small human girl who saw the world very differently than everyone else. The human delegation's arrival at Draconis Prime created quite a stir. Dragons had heard rumors about this new species that had recently joined the galactic community, but few had actually seen humans in person. Captain Maria Santos led her small team through the massive crystal corridors of the royal palace, marveling at the incredible architecture. Emma walked beside her mother, her eyes wide with wonder. The palace was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Walls made of living crystal pulsed with soft light, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. But despite the beauty around her, she couldn't shake the feeling of sadness that had been growing stronger since they landed. Queen Zephyra received the human delegation in her throne room, a vast chamber with a ceiling that opened to the stars above. The queen was magnificent, her golden scales catching the light like liquid metal. Her eyes, ancient and wise, studied the small group of humans with curiosity. "Welcome to Draconis Prime," the queen said, her voice like distant thunder. "I am Queen Zephyra, ruler of the Dragon Empire. You are the first humans to visit our world." Captain Santos stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Maria Santos of the Earth Coalition. This is a great honor. We come in peace, hoping to establish diplomatic relations between our peoples." The queen nodded approvingly. "Your species interests us. We have heard that despite your small size and lack of natural weapons, you have managed to develop impressive technology and spread across many star systems. Tell me, how do humans handle weakness among your kind?" The question seemed odd to Maria, but she answered honestly. "We believe that diversity makes us stronger, Your Majesty. Those who are different often bring new perspectives and solutions that help all of humanity." A flash of something crossed the queen's enormous features. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. How that unusual? And what of those born with defects or disabilities? Emma stepped forward before her mother could stop her. "We help them," she said simply. "Everyone deserves love and care no matter how they're born." The queen's massive head lowered to study the small human girl more closely. Emma didn't flinch or step back, even though the dragon's head was larger than her entire body. Instead, she looked directly into the queen's ancient eyes with a calmness that surprised everyone in the room. "You speak of love as if it applies to all beings," the queen said slowly. "Even those who are flawed?" "Especially those," Emma replied. "Sometimes the ones who seem different are actually the most special of all." Queen Zephyra was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke again. "I would like to show you our nursery, young human. Your mother and the other diplomats can discuss treaties and trade agreements with my advisors. But you might find our young dragons interesting." Emma's heart began to beat faster. The sadness she had been feeling was stronger now, pulling her towards something she couldn't yet understand. "I would love to see them, Your Majesty." The queen led Emma through more crystal corridors, past magnificent tapestries depicting dragon history and great battles. Guards watched them pass, their expressions curious and somewhat confused. It was unusual for the queen to personally escort a visitor, especially a human child. As they approached the nursery, Emma could hear the sounds of young dragons playing. There were roars and squeaks, the sound of wings flapping and what sounded like small explosions. But underneath it all, she sensed something else. Something lonely and afraid. The nursery doors were enormous, made of the same living crystal as the rest of the palace. They opened silently at the queen's approach, revealing a vast space filled with toys, sleeping areas, and climbing structures. Several young dragons were engaged in a mock battle, breathing small flames at each other and wrestling playfully. But Emma's attention was immediately drawn to a dark corner where a small white shape huddled alone. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the albino dragon for the first time. He was beautiful in a way she had never imagined possible. His white scales were like fresh snow, and his pale pink eyes held a depth of sadness that made her heart ache. "That is Frost," the queen said quietly. "He is different from the others." Emma watched as the other young dragons noticed her presence. They came bounding over, curious about the strange small creature their mother had brought. They sniffed at Emma with their large nostrils and made chittering sounds that might have been questions. But Frost remained in his corner, watching from a distance. "Why doesn't he come over?" Emma asked. "Because he knows he is not wanted," the queen replied, her voice heavy with an emotion Emma couldn't quite identify. "He cannot breathe fire like the others. His scales have no color. He is weak and brings shame to our bloodline." Emma felt anger flare up inside her chest. "That's horrible." "He's just a baby." "He is a defect," the queen said firmly. "The council believes he should be removed from the palace permanently. Some think he should be disposed of entirely." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of anger, not sadness. She had heard enough. Without asking permission, she walked directly toward the corner where Frost was hiding. The other young dragons watched her with curiosity, but none tried to stop her. As she got closer, Emma could see that Frost was even smaller than she had first thought. He was barely the size of a pony, much smaller than his siblings. His white scales were actually quite beautiful, like opals that caught and reflected light in subtle ways. His wings, though translucent, had a delicate beauty that reminded her of butterfly wings. "Hello," Emma said softly, sitting down on the floor near Frost. "My name is Emma. What's yours?" Frost lifted his head slightly, his pale pink eyes meeting hers. He made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. Emma could see old bite marks on his tail and scratches on his wings where the other dragons had hurt him. "I know you're Frost," she continued. "That's a beautiful name. I'm sorry your family has been mean to you, but I want you to know that I think you're absolutely perfect just the way you are." The albino dragon took a tentative step toward her. Emma held out her hand, palm up, the way she had been taught to approach nervous animals. Frost sniffed at her fingers, his breath cool against her skin. Behind them, Queen Zephyra watched in amazement. Never before had anyone, dragon or otherwise, shown such immediate acceptance of her strange son. Most beings recoiled from Frost in disgust or fear, but this small human child seemed to see something in him that everyone else had missed. Emma slowly reached out and gently touched Frost's snout. His scales were surprisingly warm despite his cold breath. The moment her skin made contact with his, something extraordinary happened. A soft glow began to emanate from where they touched, spreading outward across Frost's white scales. The young dragon's eyes widened in wonder, and for the first time since hatching he made a sound that wasn't sad or afraid. It was a soft musical note that seemed to resonate through the crystal walls of the nursery. All the other dragons stopped playing and turned to stare. Even Queen Zephyra gasped in surprise. The glow that spread across Frost's scales grew brighter, and Emma felt a strange tingling sensation in her fingers. It wasn't painful, but rather like touching something alive with electricity. The albino dragon's eyes began to change color, shifting from pale pink to a brilliant silver that seemed to hold starlight within them. "What is happening?" Queen Zephyra whispered, her massive form trembling with shock. Emma didn't answer because she was experiencing something she had never felt before. Images and emotions that weren't her own flooded her mind. She saw flashes of Frost's short life, felt his loneliness and pain, but also sensed something much deeper. There was a power within the albino dragon that no one had recognized, something ancient and profound that had been sleeping until this moment. The other young dragons had stopped their play entirely and were now backing away from Frost and Emma. But instead of the usual fear or disgust they showed their white sibling, their expressions showed something new, awe. Frost stood up slowly, his small body trembling with newfound energy. The silver light in his eyes pulsed gently, and when he breathed out instead of cold air, a shimmering mist emerged that sparkled like diamond dust. Where the mist touched the crystal walls of the nursery, beautiful patterns appeared like frost formations, but far more complex and beautiful. Impossible, the queen breathed. The ancient texts speak of dragons who could manipulate ice and crystal, but that bloodline was thought to be extinct thousands of years ago. Emma felt drawn to do something she didn't fully understand. Still touching Frost's snout, she leaned forward and gently kissed the spot between his eyes where the glow seemed strongest. The moment her lips touched his scales, the entire nursery exploded with silver light. When the light faded, everything had changed. Frost's appearance was still the same, but his presence felt completely different. He stood taller, more confident, and his translucent wings now caught the light in ways that made them appear to be made of living ice. The walls around them were covered in the most beautiful crystal formations anyone had ever seen, spiraling patterns that seemed to tell a story in their frozen curves. But the most shocking change was in Emma herself. Her brown hair now had streaks of silver running through it, and her green eyes held flecks of the same starlight that shone in Frost's. She felt different too, as if she could sense things that had been hidden from her before. "The bond," Queen Zephyra said in a voice filled with wonder and terror. "You have formed the ancient bond with him, but that's impossible. The bond can only be formed between dragons and only under the most extreme circumstances." Emma stood up slowly, still feeling the strange energy flowing between her and Frost. "What bond? What are you talking about?" "Legends speak of a connection that can form between two souls when they recognize each other completely," the queen explained, her voice distant as she recalled ancient stories. "It was said to grant both beings access to powers they could never achieve alone. But it hasn't happened in over 10,000 years and never between different species." Frost made that musical sound again, but this time it was louder, more confident. The other young dragons, instead of running away, began to approach cautiously. Pyrex, the red dragon who had been Frost's biggest tormentor, stopped just a few feet away and lowered his head in what was clearly a gesture of respect. "I don't understand what's happening," Emma said, looking at her hands, which now seemed to shimmer with the same silver light. "But I know that Frost isn't broken or wrong. He's just different, and different can be amazing." The sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridor outside the nursery. A moment later, Captain Santos burst through the doors, followed by several of the Queen's advisors. She had felt something strange, a pulling sensation that led her to the nursery, though she couldn't explain why. "Emma, what in the world is—" Maria's voice trailed off as she took in the transformed nursery, her daughter's changed appearance and the glowing albino dragon standing beside her. Elder Korath, who had followed the queen to the nursery, fell to his knees when he saw the crystal formations on the walls. "The prophecy of the Starborn," he whispered. "After all these millennia, it has come to pass." "What prophecy?" Emma asked, though she was beginning to suspect that her strange dreams about Draconis Prime had been more than just her imagination. "The Elder's ancient voice shook as he recited words that had been passed down through generations. "When the white dragon wakes from his slumber of sorrow, and the star-touched child of another world offers love without condition, the ice shall sing, the crystal shall dance, and the two shall become as one soul in two forms. Together they shall bridge the gap between all peoples and bring peace to the fractured galaxy." Emma looked at Frost, and somehow she knew that the Elder spoke the truth. The sadness she had felt since arriving at Draconis Prime was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection that felt as natural as breathing. "Your Majesty," Elder Korath continued, "this changes everything. The child is not just any dragon. He is the Starborn, the one foretold to unite the scattered powers of our ancient bloodlines, and the human girl, she is his bonded companion, the bridge builder spoken of in the oldest prophecies." Queen Zephyra looked at her transformed son with new eyes. The shame and disappointment she had felt were replaced by something she had never expected to feel about Frost: pride. "But the council, the other nobles, they will never accept this. They will say it's impossible, that the prophecies are just old stories." As if summoned by her words, the massive doors of the nursery burst open again. This time it was council members Ignis and Tempest, along with several other dragon nobles. They had felt the energy surge from the nursery and come to investigate. "What is the meaning of this?" roared Ignis, his red scales flaring with anger. "Why does the entire palace shake with unknown power?" His words died in his throat as he saw the transformed nursery and the glowing figures of Emma and Frost. The crystal formations on the walls pulsed with gentle light, and the air itself seemed to sing with harmonic frequencies that touched something deep in every dragon's soul. Tempest's blue scales turned pale as he recognized what he was seeing. "The old magic," he whispered. "The power of the first dragons. But how is this possible?" Emma stepped forward, and though she was still just a 12-year-old human girl, her presence now commanded attention in a way that surprised everyone, including herself. "It's possible because you've all been wrong about what makes someone powerful," she said clearly. "Frost isn't weak because he's different. He's special because he's different. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the ones who are really blind." Frost moved to stand beside Emma, his silver eyes meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. When he breathed out, the diamond dust mist swirled around the room, and everywhere it touched, new crystal formations bloomed. But these weren't just decorative. They pulsed with energy that every dragon in the room could feel, a power that was both ancient and completely new. The young dragon who had been rejected by everyone now stood as living proof that the old ways of thinking were wrong. News of the awakening spread through the palace like wildfire. Within hours, dragons from across Draconis Prime were gathering in the great halls, all wanting to see the albino hatchling, who had somehow manifested the legendary ice powers. But more shocking to many was the fact that a human child had bonded with a dragon, something that the ancient texts said was impossible. Emma and Frost remained in the nursery, surrounded by the beautiful crystal formations that continued to grow and change. Emma was learning to understand the bond she shared with the young dragon. She could feel his emotions as if they were her own, and somehow she knew that he could sense her thoughts as well. "Are you scared?" she asked him softly, running her hand along his silver-white scales. Frost made a gentle humming sound and nuzzled her shoulder. Through their connection, Emma felt his response. He wasn't scared anymore. For the first time in his short life, he felt safe and accepted. But more than that, he felt powerful. The energy flowing through him was unlike anything any dragon had experienced in thousands of years. Captain Santos stood with Queen Zephyra, watching her daughter with a mixture of wonder and concern. "Your Majesty, I need to understand what has happened to Emma. Is she in any danger?" "I do not know," the Queen admitted. "The bond between souls is spoken of in our oldest legends, but no dragon alive has ever witnessed it. According to the stories, both beings are changed by the connection, but they also become stronger than either could be alone." Elder Korath approached them, carrying an ancient book bound in dragon scales. "I have been researching the old text," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "The star-born dragon was prophesied to appear during a time of great change in the galaxy. His power would not be fire like other dragons, but ice and crystal, representing preservation and memory rather than destruction." He opened the book to a page covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as they looked at them. "And here, it speaks of the bridge builder, a being from another world who would help the Starborn find his true power. Together they would bring peace to warring peoples and unite the galaxy under a new understanding." "Bring peace?" scoffed Ignis, who had been listening from nearby. "Our empire is built on strength and fear. Peace is for the weak." Emma looked up at the red dragon, her silver-flecked eyes meeting his fiery gaze without flinching. "Maybe that's why your empire is having problems," she said simply. "Fear doesn't last forever. Eventually people get tired of being afraid and start fighting back." Her words struck closer to the truth than anyone wanted to admit. Reports had been coming in from across the dragon territories. Several worlds had begun open rebellion, encouraged by news of the defective dragon hatchling. Other species that had been under dragon rule were questioning whether they needed to continue following dragon laws. Queen Zephyra felt the weight of these troubles pressing down on her. "Child, you speak of peace, but how can we maintain order across hundreds of worlds without the threat of our power?" Emma stood up and Frost moved to stand beside her. The young dragon's presence seemed to amplify her words, giving them a weight that surprised everyone. "You don't maintain order through fear. You create it through respect and cooperation. People follow leaders they trust, not ones they're afraid of. And what would a human child know about ruling an empire?" Tempest demanded, his blue scales darkening with anger. Before Emma could answer, something extraordinary happened. The crystal formations around the room began to resonate with harmonious sounds, creating a music that seemed to come from the very walls. Through her bond with Frost, Emma found herself understanding the meaning of the crystal song. "The crystals remember," she said, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality. "They hold the memories of the first dragons, the ones who built the original empire not through conquest, but through alliance and mutual aid." The crystalline music grew louder, and images began to appear within the formations. They showed scenes from thousands of years ago, when dragons worked alongside other species to build great cities and explore distant stars. It was a vision of cooperation that none of the current dragons had ever imagined. Frost stepped forward and breathed out another cloud of diamond dust mist. Where it touched the existing crystals, the images became clearer and more detailed. The watching dragons saw their ancestors not as conquerors but as partners in a great galactic civilization. "This is impossible," whispered Ignis, but his voice held wonder rather than anger. "The old records speak only of our military victories and territorial expansions." "Because someone changed the records," Emma replied, still connected to the crystal memories through Frost. "Sometime long ago, dragons forgot their true history and began to believe that might made right, but the crystals remember the truth." Elder Korath was frantically taking notes, his old hands shaking with excitement. "If this is accurate, it changes everything we thought we knew about dragon history. We were never meant to be conquerors. We were meant to be guardians and protectors." The implications of this revelation rippled through the room like shockwaves. If the crystals were right, then the entire foundation of the current dragon empire was built on a lie. They had spent thousands of years ruling through fear when their ancestors had built civilization through cooperation. Queen Zephyra looked at her albino son with new understanding. "Frost carries the power of memory and preservation. He can help us remember who we were meant to be." But not everyone was ready to accept this new reality. Several of the younger council members began arguing among themselves, their voices rising in anger and confusion. The idea of giving up their position as the galaxy's dominant species was too much for them to accept. "Enough," roared Tempest, his voice shaking the crystal formations. "I will not listen to this nonsense from a defective hatchling and an alien child. Our empire is strong because we are strong. We will not weaken ourselves by following ancient fairy tales." He opened his massive jaws and prepared to breathe a devastating blast of blue fire directly at Emma and Frost. But before he could release it, something amazing happened. Frost stepped protectively in front of Emma and breathed out the largest cloud of diamond dust mist he had yet produced. Instead of harmlessly sparkling in the air, the mist met Tempest's fire and transformed it. The blue flames became crystalline structures of incredible beauty, frozen in midair like a sculpture made of ice and fire. The entire room fell silent. Never before had anyone seen fire turn to crystal, let alone a hatchling stopping an adult dragon's attack. The frozen flames hung in the air between them, beautiful and impossible. "The power of preservation," whispered Elder Korath. "He can turn destruction into creation, war into art, hatred into beauty." Emma felt tears running down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. Through her bond with Frost, she could feel the pure joy of a young dragon who had finally discovered what he was truly capable of. He wasn't weak or defective. He was exactly what the galaxy needed. But she also sensed something else through their connection. Frost's power was growing stronger, but it was also attracting attention from beyond Draconis Prime. Somewhere in the depths of space, ancient forces that had been sleeping for millennia were beginning to stir. The awakening of the starborn dragon had sent ripples through the very fabric of reality, and not all of the beings who felt those ripples had good intentions. 3 days after the awakening, the first signs of trouble arrived at Draconis Prime. A massive ship appeared at the edge of the star system, its design unlike anything the dragons had ever seen. It was black as the void between stars, with strange symbols that seemed to hurt the eyes of anyone who looked at them directly. Emma was in the royal gardens with Frost when the alarms began to sound throughout the palace. The young dragon's silver eyes immediately clouded with concern, and through their bond, Emma felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with Frost's ice powers. "Something's wrong," she said, placing her hand on Frost's neck. "Something very old and very angry is coming." Queen Zephyra's voice echoed through the palace communication systems. "All dragons to battle stations. We have visitors who have not announced their peaceful intentions." Emma and Frost hurried back to the throne room where they found chaos. Dragon guards were rushing to and fro, preparing weapons and defensive systems. Queen Zephyra stood before a massive viewing screen that showed the approaching black ship, her golden scales tight with tension. "What is it?" Emma asked as she and Frost approached the throne. "We do not know," the Queen replied grimly. "The ship does not respond to our communications and our sensors cannot penetrate its hull. But Elder Korath believes he recognizes the symbols on its surface." The ancient dragon stepped forward, his face pale with fear. "They are the marks of the Shadow Collective, a group of beings that the first dragons fought long ago. According to the crystal memories that young Frost awakened, they were defeated and banished beyond the galaxy's edge thousands of years ago. And now they've come back," Emma said, understanding flooding through her, "because they felt Frost's awakening." "That is what we fear," Queen Zephyra admitted. "The Shadow Collective sought to drain the life force from entire star systems. They were stopped only by the combined power of all dragon bloodlines working together, but most of those bloodlines are extinct now. The black ship came to a stop just outside Draconis Prime's orbital defenses. For several minutes nothing happened. Then, without warning, smaller ships began emerging from the larger vessel. These were sleek and fast, moving with a fluid grace that was somehow disturbing to watch. Emma felt Frost trembling beside her, and through their bond, she sensed something that chilled her to the bone. The young dragon could feel the Shadow Collective's presence like a wound in the fabric of space itself. They were beings of pure hunger and darkness, creatures that existed only to consume and destroy. "They're not alive," Emma said suddenly. "Not in the way we understand life. They're more like holes in reality that eat everything around them." Queen Zephyra looked at her in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "Frost can sense them through the crystal network," Emma explained. "The crystals remember the Shadow Collective, and that memory is flowing through him to me." The first wave of shadow ships reached Draconis Prime's outer defenses. The Dragon fleet met them with blasts of fire and energy weapons, but their attacks seemed to have little effect. The shadow ships absorbed the energy and grew stronger, their dark hulls gleaming with stolen power. "Our weapons are useless," reported General Blazewrath from the command center. "They're draining energy from every attack we make." Queen Zephyra closed her eyes in despair. "Then we are doomed. If our fire cannot touch them, we have no other weapons." "Yes, you do," Emma said firmly. "You have Frost." The albino dragon looked up at his mother with silver eyes that now held ancient wisdom beyond his years. Through the crystal network, he had accessed memories of the first war against the Shadow Collective. He knew what needed to be done, even though it terrified him. "The ice power doesn't just preserve and create," Emma continued, understanding flowing through her bond with Frost. "It can also freeze the very essence of these shadow beings, stop them from consuming energy." "But he's just a hatchling," Queen Zephyra protested. "How could he possibly fight beings that threaten our entire fleet?" Emma looked at Frost, and in that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "He won't be fighting alone. We're bonded, remember? His power flows through me and my humanity flows through him. Together we might be able to do what neither of us could do separately." Before anyone could stop them, Emma climbed onto Frost's back. The young dragon's translucent wings spread wide, and for the first time since hatching, he took to the air. But this wasn't the weak, stumbling flight of a normal hatchling. Supported by the ancient ice magic flowing through him, Frost flew with the grace and power of an adult dragon. "Emma, no," Captain Santos cried out, but her daughter was already soaring toward the palace's exit. As they flew through the crystal corridors and out into the space above Draconis Prime, Emma felt the full power of their bond awakening. She could see through Frost's eyes and feel the cosmic currents that flowed around them. More importantly, she could sense the Shadow Collective ships and understand their true nature. They weren't just energy vampires. They were wounds in the universe itself, places where reality had been torn open to let in the darkness between dimensions, but wounds could be healed and tears could be sewn shut. That was what the ice power was really for. Frost flew directly toward the advancing shadow ships, his small form dwarfed by their massive hulls. The shadow beings sensed his approach and turned their attention toward him, recognizing the threat he represented. Dark energy began to lance out from their ships, seeking to drain the life from the young dragon. But when the shadow energy touched Frost's scales, something unexpected happened. Instead of being drained, the energy was transformed. The darkness became crystalline light and the consuming hunger became preserving ice. Emma felt the transformation happening through their bond, and she added her own human will to the process. "We're not here to fight you," she called out, her voice somehow carrying across the vacuum of space. "We're here to heal you." The shadow ships paused their attack, confused by this unexpected response. In that moment of hesitation, Frost breathed out the largest cloud of diamond dust mist he had ever produced. But this time the mist was infused with Emma's human compassion and understanding. Where the mist touched the shadow ships, their wounds began to close. The tears in reality started to seal themselves, and the darkness that poured through them began to fade. For the first time in thousands of years, the Shadow Collective beings felt something other than endless hunger. They felt peace. One by one, the shadow ships stopped their attacks. Their crews, who had been consumed by darkness for so long they had forgotten what it was like to be whole, began to remember who they had been before the hunger took them. But the largest ship, the one carrying the Shadow Collective's leader, was not so easily healed. Its wound was deeper, older, and filled with so much darkness that even Frost's power struggled against it. The massive command ship of the Shadow Collective loomed before Emma and Frost like a living nightmare. Its hull writhed with darkness so thick it seemed to eat the light from nearby stars. From within its depths, a voice spoke directly into their minds, ancient and filled with rage. "So, the Starborn awakens at last," the voice hissed. "We have waited millennia for this moment. Your power will feed us for eons, young dragon, and when we are done with you, we will consume every star in this galaxy." Emma felt Frost's fear through their bond, but she also felt something else. Determination. The young dragon had seen through the crystal memories what the Shadow Collective had done to entire civilizations, and he would not let it happen again. "You're wrong," Emma called out, her voice strengthened by their connection. "Frost's power isn't food for you to consume. It's medicine for wounds that have been festering too long." The ship's hull split open like a mouthful of teeth, revealing the being that commanded the Shadow Collective. It had once been a dragon eons ago, but now it was something else entirely. Its scales were gone, replaced by a skin of living darkness. Its eyes were empty holes that led to nothing, and when it spoke, the void between dimensions seemed to whisper with it. "I am Vorthak the Endless," it declared, first of the consumed, leader of the hungry dark. "I have devoured 1,000 worlds and will devour 1,000 more. Your healing light cannot touch what I have become." But Emma wasn't looking at the monster before them. Through her bond with Frost, she was seeing something else entirely. Beneath all that darkness and hunger, buried so deep that even Vorthak had forgotten it existed, was the spark of what he had once been, a dragon who had tried to protect his people and had been consumed by his own desperate desire for power. "You're not endless," Emma said softly. "You're hurt. You've been hurt for so long that you've forgotten there was ever anything else." Vorthak roared with fury, and the sound shattered asteroids in nearby space. Dark energy poured from his form like a tide, seeking to overwhelm the small dragon and human girl who dared to defy him. But Frost was ready. He breathed out his diamond dust mist, but this time it was different. Emma's compassion and human understanding flowed through it, while the crystal memories of 1,000,000 dragons added their wisdom. The mist didn't just transform Vorthak's attack. It reached through the darkness and touched that buried spark of his original self. For just a moment, Vorthak's empty eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition. "No," he whispered. I will not remember. Memory is pain, and I have chosen emptiness. Memory is also hope," Emma replied, "and love and connection, and everything that makes existence worth having. You chose emptiness because you were afraid of being hurt again, but emptiness isn't safety. It's just another kind of death." Through their bond, Emma felt Frost gathering power from sources she hadn't known existed. The young dragon was connected not just to the crystal network of Draconis Prime, but to every crystal formation the ancient dragons had ever created throughout the galaxy. Millions of worlds, billions of crystal structures, all holding memories of beauty and love and hope. Frost opened his mouth and sang. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but a pure note of crystalline harmony that carried with it every moment of joy the dragon species had ever experienced. Emma added her voice to his, and through their bond, the song reached across space to touch every healed shadow ship in the fleet. One by one, The former Shadow Collective members added their voices to the song. They remembered what they had been before the darkness took them. Explorers, artists, scientists, parents, children. Their combined voices created a harmony that shook the very foundations of reality. Vorthak writhed in agony as the song reached him. "Stop," he pleaded. "Please stop. I cannot bear to remember what I have lost." "You haven't lost it," Emma said gently. "It's still there, waiting for you to come home." The song grew stronger, and with it came images. Vorthak as he had been millions of years ago. A golden dragon with eyes full of wisdom and kindness. He had been a teacher, helping young dragons learn to use their powers responsibly. He had loved the beauty of the stars and the joy of discovery. But then the images showed his fall. A plague had threatened his world, and in his desperation to save his people, he had tried to absorb the life force of the disease itself. Instead, he had been consumed by it, transformed into something that hungered constantly for the energy of others. "I tried to save them," Vorthak whispered, his voice breaking. "I only wanted to save them, and instead I became the very thing that destroyed them." "Trying to save people isn't wrong," Emma said. "But you don't have to carry that failure alone anymore. Let us help you heal." Frost flew closer to the massive dark form, showing no fear even though Vorthak could have destroyed him with a thought. The young dragon's silver eyes met the empty sockets where Vorthak's eyes should have been, and in that gaze was nothing but acceptance and love. "I don't deserve healing," Vorthak said. "Nobody deserves to suffer forever," Emma replied. "Everyone deserves a chance to find peace." Frost breathed out one final cloud of diamond dust mist, but this time Emma poured everything she had into it. Her memories of every kind word she had ever heard, every hug she had ever received, every moment of unconditional love from her mother. The mist surrounded Vorthak like a gentle embrace, not forcing change upon him but simply offering him the choice. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly cracks of light began to appear in Vorthak's dark form. The empty holes where his eyes had been began to glow with soft silver radiance. His skin of living darkness started to fall away like old scabs, revealing scales that were white as fresh snow. "I remember," Vorthak whispered, and his voice was no longer the sound of the void. It was the voice of a dragon who had found his way home after being lost for eons. "I remember who I was meant to be." The transformation rippled outward from Vorthak to his command ship, and from there to every vessel in the Shadow Collective fleet. Darkness became light, hunger became satisfaction, and despair became hope. The wounds in reality closed completely, and the spaces between dimensions healed themselves. Emma felt tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched the rebirth of beings who had been trapped in nightmare for millions of years. Through her bond with Frost, she could feel the young dragon's wonder and happiness at what they had accomplished together. But their work wasn't finished yet. News of the transformation was already spreading across the galaxy, and every species that had been living in fear of both the dragons and the Shadow Collective was about to learn that the universe had become a very different place. 6 months after the healing of the Shadow Collective, the galaxy was transforming in ways no one could have imagined. Emma stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching as ships from hundreds of different worlds docked peacefully side by side. Dragons worked alongside humans, while the former Shadow Collective members shared their advanced technology with species that had once feared them. Frost had grown significantly, though he was still smaller than other dragons his age. His white scales now shimmered with patterns that seemed to shift like aurora lights, and his silver eyes held depths of wisdom that amazed everyone who met him. The bond between him and Emma had evolved too, becoming less about shared emotions and more about shared purpose. "The Galactic Council meeting will begin soon," Captain Santos said, approaching her daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. Over the past months, she had watched Emma mature from a curious child into someone who could negotiate peace treaties between species that had been enemies for centuries. "I know, Mom," Emma replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "Frost and I are ready." The young dragon appeared beside them, moving with the silent grace that had surprised everyone. Despite his size, Frost could become nearly invisible when he chose to, his crystal powers allowing him to bend light around himself. It was just one of many abilities he had discovered as his powers continued to grow. The main assembly hall of Unity Station was enormous, designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and atmospheric needs. Queen Zephyra was there, representing the reformed Dragon Empire, along with representatives from the human colonies, the Andromedan Trading Union, the Silicon-based collective, and dozens of other civilizations. But the most remarkable sight was Vorthak, the former leader of the Shadow Collective, now calling himself by his original name of Aurelius. He had regained much of his dragon form, though his scales remained white like frosts, marking him as one of the redeemed. He had become one of the most passionate advocates for the new galactic cooperation, using his vast knowledge and experience to help other species overcome their own dark histories. "Before we begin," announced the session moderator, a floating crystal being from the resonance worlds, "I would like to acknowledge the two individuals who made this gathering possible. Emma Santos of Earth and Frost of Draconis Prime have shown us that the greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the courage to heal." Applause filled the chamber, though it took many different forms depending on the species. Dragons roared softly, the crystal beings chimed harmoniously, and the atmospheric entities created beautiful light displays. Emma and Frost walked to the center of the assembly. Though Emma was still just 13 years old, no one questioned her right to speak for the new alliance. Through her bond with Frost, she had become a bridge between species in ways that went far beyond translation. 6 months ago, Emma began, her voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast chamber. Everyone in this galaxy believed that strength came from fear, that safety came from being stronger than your enemies. But we've learned something different. Real strength comes from understanding, and real safety comes from making sure that no one has to be your enemy. Frost stepped forward and breathed out a gentle stream of diamond dust mist. Where it touched the air, images appeared, crystal formations that showed the recent history of galactic cooperation. Worlds that had been starving now had abundance. Species that had been at war for centuries were sharing resources and knowledge, and the ancient wounds between civilizations were finally beginning to heal. "The old empire was built on conquest," Queen Zephyra said, rising from her place among the delegates. "But the new alliance is built on consent. No world is forced to join us, and every species has an equal voice in our decisions." Aurelius spoke next, his transformed voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have seen what happens when power becomes an end in itself, rather than a means to protect and nurture. The Shadow Collective was born from that mistake, and it consumed millions of worlds before we learned to choose healing over hunger. A representative from the rebel worlds, a species that had been fighting dragon rule for decades, stood up. What guarantee do we have that this isn't just another form of control? How do we know that the dragons and humans won't eventually decide to rule over us again?" Emma smiled at the question. It was one they had heard many times, and she understood the fear behind it. "You don't have to trust us," she said simply. "The alliance doesn't work that way. It's not about one species being in charge of the others. It's about all of us working together to solve problems that are too big for any one world to handle alone." Frost projected new images into the air, showing recent joint missions. A plague on the Outer Rim worlds had been stopped by combining human medical knowledge with dragon crystal healing and Shadow Collective energy manipulation. A dying star had been stabilized using technology shared between 6 different species. Refugee populations from destroyed worlds had been resettled with help from volunteers across the galaxy. "But what about conflicts?" asked another delegate. "What happens when our interests don't align? What happens when we disagree about important decisions?" "Then we argue about it," Emma replied with a grin. "We debate, we negotiate, we compromise, and sometimes we agree to disagree. But we don't go to war over it. We've learned that most conflicts come from misunderstanding or fear, and both of those can be solved with better communication." The crystal being moderator chimed thoughtfully. "The success of the past 6 months has been remarkable, but many of us wonder if this cooperation can last. What happens as you both grow older? What happens if your bond changes or breaks?" Emma looked at Frost, and through their connection she felt his answer. It was the same as her own. "Our bond isn't what holds the alliance together," she said. "It's what started it. But now that all of you have learned to work together, you don't need us to keep doing it. The alliance belongs to everyone, not just to us." An elderly delegate from the deep space colonies raised a trembling hand. "Young ones, my people have lived through centuries of war and oppression. We have seen many promises of peace broken by those who made them. What makes this time different? Frost moved closer to the old being, his presence radiating the gentle warmth that had become his signature. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that touched something deep in every listener's soul. Because this time we're not trying to impose peace from above. We're building it from below, one relationship at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one choice to trust instead of fear at a time. The images around them shifted to show something new, not grand battles or political ceremonies, but small moments of connection. A dragon child playing with human children, former Shadow Collective scientists working alongside academics from a dozen species, trade ships sharing navigation routes and helping each other through dangerous regions of space. Peace isn't something you declare, Emma added. It's something you live every day in every choice you make about how to treat others. The assembly continued for hours, with delegates asking questions and sharing their own stories of how the new alliance had affected their worlds. There were still problems to solve, conflicts to resolve, and fears to overcome. But for the first time in galactic history, every species felt they had a voice in shaping their shared future. As the formal session ended and delegates began to mingle informally, Emma found herself standing alone with Frost on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel overhead. The young dragon had grown not just in size but in wisdom, and through their bond she could feel his contentment at what they had accomplished together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up the chance to be a normal dragon?" Frost's silver eyes sparkled with amusement. "Do you ever regret giving up the chance to be a normal human?" Emma laughed, realizing how silly her question had been. Neither of them had ever been normal, and that was exactly what made them perfect for the roles they had chosen to play. A soft chime from the station's communication system interrupted their quiet moment. "Emma, Frost, we have a situation developing in the Andromeda sector. 3 species are on the verge of war over mining rights to a neutron star. They've specifically requested mediation from both of you." Emma sighed but smiled at the same time. Their work was never truly finished, but that was okay. Every conflict they helped resolve, every fear they helped overcome, every bridge they helped build between different peoples, made the galaxy a little bit better. "Ready for another adventure?" she asked Frost. The albino dragon spread his magnificent wings, which now sparkled with the light of 1,000 saved worlds. "Always," he replied. "After all, we have a universe to heal." As their ship departed Unity Station, heading toward their next mission, Emma reflected on how much had changed since that first day in the dragon nursery. A rejected hatchling and a human girl had somehow managed to transform not just themselves, but an entire galaxy. But perhaps that was the most human thing of all, the belief that love and understanding could overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible it seemed. And perhaps that was the most draconic thing of all, the willingness to use